we need to start making more conscious material choices.
Set up an initiative called Make Fashion Circular.
It's a tsunami of change.
Hello and welcome to The Diff. My name is Colin Webster, one of the Diff team here. In today's show, we are going to be talking about renewable energy and the future of design. As always, we are live at The Diff, so you can put in your thoughts and your questions to us throughout this session. Use the hashtag ThinkDiff on Twitter and we'll be able to find you, or use the comment section on the page you're watching this on. This morning we're going to be talking about renewable energy first before we move on to speaking about the future of design in China. Joining me right now are two guests. There's Scott Bryant, who's coming in from Brisbane. Scott Bryant is a circular economy and renewables advisor. And also there's Kerry-Ann Adamson, who has 20 years experience in hydrogen energy. Hello, Kerry-Ann.
Hiya.
And hello, Scott. So,
Good evening.
good evening, Scott. Well, good evening for you, perhaps, but we're early in the morning here in London. Scott, you've got this experience working in circular economy and working in renewables, and it's taken as a given that the future economy will be powered by renewables. But you actually believe there's a risk to renewables if they don't learn a thing or two from the circular economy.
Yes, so I think circular economy is all about taking it as a given that everything needs to be powered by renewables to make it fully circular. But from a renewable sector, it's much like any other industrial sector, and I guess even more so the focus is on getting renewables built and powering our economies with green energy. But the haste to get wind turbines up or solar farms built is causing a bit of an issue on the design side of things, because like any other process on the industrial and manufacturing side, these days most engineers and designers aren't planning for end of life, be it reusability or reprocessability and recyclability of their technologies. And the issue at the moment is all the infrastructure we put in to date hasn't really been designed for end of life beyond your basic steel, and we're potentially heading for a big headache with a lot of our solar panels and wind turbine blades, let alone the electric vehicles and energy storage, where we're starting to see inroads in different markets at the moment in terms of our fight against climate change and climate crisis.
And Scott, you think the renewable energy industry is uniquely placed to take advantage of the circular economy. Can you tell us a bit about why you think that is?
Yeah, sure, Colin. So for me, I think what's particularly interesting about the renewable energy sector, or the energy sector as a whole, is we know where we need to get to by 2050 to meet our climate targets, and within those climate targets we have renewable energy targets, be it on the electricity generation side or heating and transportation. And so we have a fairly clear idea of what we need to do in the next 30 years to meet those targets, in terms of what equipment we have out there that needs to come down, what equipment we need to install in order to improve our low carbon generation and consumption within the society. And so we know what equipment we're going to have already out there, and what has to come down, and what we need to put out. So we have a good idea of what we need to be designing for in terms of taking equipment down and being able to look at uses for it, and also, more importantly, for the next 30 years, what infrastructure we put out there, making sure that it's ready to come down at the end of life, and ideally be reused, repurposed, or remanufactured, and be designed so that's ready for it.
And I understand you think that the circular economy and that type of thinking about end of life and the future for materials, you believe that brings down the cost and makes renewable energies even more price competitive.
Exactly. So I think the energy sector as a whole is missing a bit of a trick at the moment. The main driver in the industry, beyond any sort of renewable targets and incentives, is bringing down the levelized cost of energy. So ideally maximizing profits in terms of those that are investing in it, but at the same time reducing costs for the end consumer, be it people in their homes or commercial entities and industry. And these days, in terms of the engineers drawing up plans for sites, for infrastructure that needs to go out, decommissioning and the end of life process is typically a very last minute thing, or not necessarily last minute, but it's last on their mind in terms of the focus is on how do we bring down the upfront costs to make this as ideal as possible and make it smooth in terms of operations and maintenance. But we're ending up in a situation, good example being on the wind side of things, where people are on the fly, ad hoc, having to adapt to a situation of, oh, what do I do with my wind farm? It's coming to an end of life, and I, as a big energy utility or wind farm owner, don't actually know what to do because my expertise is on building, operating green energy. It's not about disposing of it at end of life, and the original equipment manufacturers haven't actually designed in the past to take into account the what happens at the end. They're starting to look at it, but I think we're missing a trick in terms of dealing with costs, in terms of landfill costs and cost of transportation. The cost of what people see as a waste, but I think is a resource that we need to make better use of, especially if we want to call it a green energy industry.
How realistic is it for us to think that we can be reusing, for example, the turbine blades? Isn't there a real problem when it comes to utilising them again?
Yes and no, Colin. So I think in small scale instances and not so replicable, there are clear opportunities for direct reuse. I think my favourite example, which is often cited, is the Netherlands used some wind turbine blades that came down a few years ago, and some architects built it into a children's playground. Realistically, we're not going to have tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of children's playgrounds built out of old wind turbines, but there are scientists and groups looking at how you can treat the end-of-life wind turbine blade waste, which is aside from the concrete bases of wind turbines, that's the hardest part. That's currently going to landfill or being incinerated, and there are options for it. But I think with the large volume of equipment and materials we're going to see within the energy sector, it's going to be a relatively captive flow of those materials because you know who the owners are and you know where they are. But they're going to be in a state that after 20 or 30 years they are knackered. But if we've designed it so the materials we are using have a process they can go to and be reprocessed or recycled back down into virgin components again, I think we're in for a shot for bringing down that cost of energy.
Scott, I'm going to bring in Kerry-Ann for a minute. We're going to speak specifically about one technology, hydrogen energy. Kerry-Ann, you've got 20 years experience working with hydrogen. And we were talking before we went live, you were telling me we've been using hydrogen for 50 years, but is it fair to say it's not a well understood technology?
From the general public, absolutely. So it's a fuel that's been behind the curtain. So it's used in industrial processes, been used for a long, long time in the refining industry, ammonia, glass making, and steel. So it's used right across the board by industry, but it's an industrial input, and it is very mucky at the minute. Bottom line, it's produced from fossil fuels. 98% of the world's hydrogen is produced from fossil fuels. So at the minute, it's industrial fuel and it's mucky, but it's going through this huge transition linking with renewable energy.
Is that why it's not been widely adopted? Well, surely not because it's dirty, because fossil fuels are dirty. So why don't we see it used more widely in, say, transportation?
Up until very recently, we haven't had the vehicles on the road. So as anybody who knows this industry at all will know that about 20 years ago or 10 years ago, there was a bit of a hype bubble around the vehicles. And there was a lot of engineering optimism about how quickly we could transition something from high innovation to mass market. And that kind of fell foul of a lot of things. But what we're seeing now is a lot more interest in cars, from cars right through to shipping, trains, bikes, trucks, you name it, they're looking at hydrogen. The one the furthest away is obviously flights, planes. We'll leave that to one side at the minute. But at the minute, we're starting to see coming to the market much quicker these vehicles. Now, whether they're going to run on green hydrogen or brown hydrogen, green hydrogen from renewables, brown hydrogen from fossil, that's a different debate.
But there's an infrastructural element, isn't there, too? I spoke to River Simple Cars last night, and they were telling me about the problems about how do you get a hydrogen fuel cell car out there if there aren't filling stations. So chicken or egg, what needs to shift in order to move the hydrogen market forward in vehicles?
Flippin' omelette, I tell you. No, one of the biggest statements we hear all the time, it's a chicken and egg. Nobody wants to make first mover, right? The industry saying, well, we don't release the cars because there's no infrastructure. The infrastructure providers saying we don't want to provide the infrastructure because there's no cars. Right? We need new market entrants. We need innovation in business models. We need new people to come to market. We need new ways of thinking about the world. So River Simple, one of the things they're looking at, and obviously I don't work for River Simple, I'm not touting for them, is they're talking about putting the cars and the infrastructure in at the same time. This is not rocket science, right? It's partnership. It's working together. And a lot of what what Scott and I have talked about before is how working together, is how partnerships are needed. Not just the infrastructure for the refueling and the vehicles, but how do you produce the green hydrogen and ensure it's green hydrogen that goes into those vehicles. We need all the actors around the table to create a systems-wide change so we can actually move on this decarbonisation journey much quicker and much more systemically.
Let's talk about the systemic nature of it all in just a second, but first, the cost of hydrogen being produced from renewables, I believe it's falling. Is it falling fast enough? Is it? Tell us where it's standing in terms of price.
So it's much higher at the minute. It's just fundamentally much higher because one of the greatest inputs into that fuel price is the price of renewable energy, which is much higher at the minute than, say, natural gas in some regions. So the quicker we can get the cost of renewable energy down, the quicker we can drive down the cost of green hydrogen. And a lot of the problems we have as well at the minute is when you're looking at industrial models or models of fuel purchase, you actually model on least cost, not least carbon. Right? And if you go at least cost and you want hydrogen, you're always going to get, at the minute, mucky hydrogen because it's cheaper. Right? So we need to, again, think about how we purchase hydrogen and how we use it, or how we interact with government to ensure that the approach is, well, if we can prove that hydrogen comes from renewable energy, and if we can prove the carbon content of the production process, is there scope for some form of subsidy or some form of intervention there?
Okay, we're getting some questions coming in from the online audience. It's great to see. We've got one. I'm going to pitch this to you actually first, Scott. How fast or how realistic is it to expect all of this to happen? What I'll take from that is how we can design our renewable energy for end of life and for repurposing.
Well, I guess I'd split that into two parts, if you like. On the one hand, for new infrastructure that's going out there, be it new wind turbines being built in wind farms and solar panels and the like, I think manufacturers of that equipment are starting, or have been in the last 5-10 years, sort of starting to dip their toes into the water of this problem, and it's becoming more of a pressing concern as we see the initial wind farms, the initial solar farms, initial utility scale batteries and electric vehicle batteries coming to end of life. And so it's, I guess, creating a bit of a cacophony of pressure on the manufacturers to start looking at it. So I think that the reality is, in the short term, sites will still go up and infrastructure will still be built, and it won't be ideally designed for end of life. But I think we're heading in the right direction. I'm assuming that's not probably as clear as the question you might have liked. But I think on the flip side, or the second point I would make is, irrespective of whether those original equipment manufacturers, the likes of Vestas and other energy equipment and infrastructure manufacturers, whether they're looking at and designing for end of life and the materials they're using, we're still going to be facing this issue irrespective of whether it's been designed for end of life. So I think there are many institutes, organizations and companies out there that are starting to tackle and look at end of life issues because they're being forced to, either because they're in the market and someone's asking them to deal with it, or because that's their area of expertise and passion. So I think we're going to be dealing with a lot of stuff ad hoc in the short term, in terms of it hasn't been built for end of life, but how can we apply solutions that both technically and economically viable to somebody to make that work. otherwise we could be getting into a sensitive situation where you've got the likes of the Daily Mail in the UK or other contentious institution or media institutions putting out there, is green energy really that green, with images of wind turbine blades in landfill, which nobody really wants to see, and no one wants to get, don't want to get that in the way of the actual need to transition to renewables just because someone says it's not quite as green as everyone thinks it should be.
That's great, Scott, and that kind of answers a question we had again online from Lena, who's wondering about that bad rep that sometimes you get in renewables. Kerry-Ann, you'd brought up the point about systems. We're moving to a conclusion point here, I think, but can you tell us, we always talk about the need to get everyone around the table and have these conversations, or else these things don't get off the ground, but what signs are there that conversations are taking place, that we are thinking about the energy and the fuel cells and the entire system all together?
So I work for a global engineering firm, and a lot of my job is to help put big projects together that actually fundamentally bring all these actors around the table, right? So whilst, let's, take this one and knock it on the head straight away. Whilst there are some in the battery electric vehicle lobby who are very contentious about the use of hydrogen and think that, theirs is the only solution, the majority of the renewables industry, the battery industry and the hydrogen industry and the fuel cell industry, the fuel cell being the conversion device for hydrogen, are very aware that working together is the way forward. And we're seeing that by bringing projects together for either investors or governments or whomever our client base is, bringing all the stakeholders and actors around the table to create these long-term, profit-driven projects. Right? So
that sounds crucial to you.
It is. It absolutely is, because the best way to bring investors in, which living in a capitalist economy, we need to bring investors into the table, project finance, venture capital, all that finance community, is to be able to show sustainable revenue and sustainable profits under all the ethical qualms and such issues that we have and that we're currently operating under, which is good. All this is good. So this is all changing behind closed doors, and all these projects are being built, as Scott and I both know, behind closed doors. We, as a systems industry, are terrible at PR. Right? We don't talk about joined-up thinking in a public forum, which is doing a huge disservice to the amount of work that's being done.
Right. Well, let's end with this question then. We'll start with you, Scott. How optimistic are you? This comes from Rob online. How optimistic are you that the renewables energy is going to borrow something from circular economy principles, and we're going to see a long and prosperous future for renewables?
Well, I think renewables are inevitable. It doesn't seem to matter which sector you talk to or which country you talk to in terms of energy. I think they are coming. Just depends on the pace. And I'd say I'd have to be in a, despite my I guess, attempts to convince everyone of being a realist, I think the long term of trying to make this happen, you have to be an optimist. But it is happening already. Circular economy is already happening, admittedly at small scales and in small pockets where people are being forced to do it just because they're seeing an issue and they're trying to deal with it. But I think it is coming, and I think it's just the more people that are talking about and actually thinking about not just the challenges of getting renewables up and built and taking a systems approach from an energy sector perspective, but also thinking about the materials and equipment side of things as something more than just something that generates green electricity, I think is the key thing in terms of accelerating this uptake of a circular economy approach in the renewable sector, and ideally helping bump along green hydrogen as a nice byproduct of that.
Just before I come to Kerry-Ann with that question, can you tell us a little bit about how the wind and solar can contribute to the hydrogen sector?
Okay, so I think contentious one, and I think Kerry-Ann is certainly the better of the three of us to contribute to that. But I think a good example of that is just at the moment, depending on how a network is set up, so how an energy sector is set up, you've got a lot of constraints in terms of how much generation can be pumped down the line to your homes or your businesses. And so I think we're missing a trick in terms of being able to use some of those electrons that we're not quite able to get down the lines to homes because the pipes aren't big enough, so to speak. I think we could be doing a lot to to use some of that excess generation capacity to generate green hydrogen, and also make use of that in remote locations like islands where they are just naturally cut off from the rest of the electricity grids. So I think for me it's just trying to look at the added value that we're currently losing just because we're not thinking outside the traditional energy box.
And I think, I know you've told me in the past, you believe this creates an opportunity in itself, because typically renewable energy is generated outside of cities, and fewer job opportunities there. But if we have to produce, say, hydrogen in situ, then you're creating job opportunities elsewhere. Is that a fair point? Is that a fair summary of how you see it?
I think that's fair. I guess it always depends on what you're going to do with that hydrogen, whether it's just then shipping it to the local service station, petrol station to then fill up some electric vehicles. It could also have flow-on effects in terms of if you've got businesses in the area that can make use of cheap hydrogen to run something new, or use hydrogen itself and turn it into additional added value products. So I think it's horses for courses and really depends on the location, but definitely.
Scott was a bit nervous in answering that. Kieran, what did he get
He did
wrong?
very well. The one thing to highlight, though, it's a very complex thing. We are so used to flicking on a light switch and refilling our cars with petrol or diesel.
That's not how you refill cars with light switches.
Because we are living in almost like a very single solution society at the minute. And we are moving forward to a very complicated energy system where if it is optimized, we can have different solutions in different areas. If your hydrogen refueling station is in a sunny area, you can produce your hydrogen locally. If you have excess wind in Orkney or in Wales or wherever you can produce hydrogen for export potentially. Or you can produce it to be used to the mainland, or you can increase your grid capacity. It's not going to be this simple, very easy to get your head around system. It's going to be very complicated. Which means there's huge room for innovation, huge room for circular economy thinking, and huge room for new entrants to the marketplace. This is not a locked market. People can come in, create jobs, create different ways of thinking, create different business models, and disrupt traditional markets. This is why it's so exciting. This is why linking renewables to hydrogen, to batteries, to energy storage is such an exciting space to work in at the minute, because it is so potentially disruptive.
Well, I think you've given us a fantastic transition to our next guest in this show. So I'm going to wrap up by saying thank you very much for both of you for participating in this conversation about renewables. What we're going to move on to in just one second is looking at that change of mindset that Kerry-Ann was talking about there. Change of mindset is required. And we have someone from the leading design school in Asia to come and speak to us about how mindsets are changing amongst designers in China. But before we go over to Professor Liu, let's hear from my colleague, Xi, who was speaking at the DIF last year, talking about how China is undergoing a major period of transformation.
From my perspective, I've witnessed the great change of my hometown. Like, for example, first of all, the built environment. The house where I grew up and where I was born is already gone. And the replace of that is, a massive area of high-rise building blocks. And it is still coming more and more. So that is the sign of the urbanization in China. And it's still coming along all the time. Linked back to what Raymond just said, the cement production in China is just massively huge. That is all because of the urbanization. And another thing which I experienced is the transport. So especially the last mile transport. So we used to have a bike or tube public transport, but not for the last miles. Last miles has been an issue in China, but now we can have sharing bikes, which has become quite popular in China. So the sharing bikes give access to everyone and at a very cheap and affordable price for people to travel around, like within 5 kilometers. Another thing which I like to mention is about the lifestyle. So giving more and more Chinese people are getting into the middle class, and there is a lot of change in their lifestyle. For example, people dining out a lot more than they used to do. Another thing is about the booming of the gig economy. So as Raymond mentioned, nowadays no one carries cash around. Everything can basically solved in your phone. If I want to get my food delivered, there is an app on my phone to get my lunch, get my Starbucks coffees, basically get paid for everything on just only a map. So that has completely changed people's lifestyle as well.
That was my colleague Zhu, who was talking last year at the DIF about some of the work we've been doing in China. And the Ellen MacArthur Foundation produced a report last year looking at what the circular economy could mean to that nation. One of the key people we've been speaking to in the production of that report is with us today. But first of all, we all know this. China has been the manufacturing centre of the world for the last couple of decades. We're all very familiar with that label, Made in China. But Professor Yongqi Lu thinks that we're about to become accustomed to a designed in China future, or designed in China label, perhaps. You're the dean at Tongji University.
Yes.
A university considered to be the #1 design school in Asia. Why is it you think that design is really taking off in China?
Yes, but first I need to clarify that when we talk about #1, I mean, it's according to QS ranking, we're #1 design school in Asia, but actually there's not that important. The ranking is not important. More important is that what you are doing. Yes, design is obviously now booming in China, and it's mainly because of the context of the societal change and economic change. And China is experiencing a dramatically transformation from manufactured China to creative China. And this is very much based on the three kinds of innovation process. The first is a technology-driven innovation. The second is a market pull innovation. But now we're talking about design-led innovation. So in some ways, it's also due to the needs of transfer its industry from a very much consumption-based to a more sustainable-based. So that's a context.
Let's talk about those three types of innovation, because I won't be the only one watching this who won't quite understand them all. There's a technology-led innovation. There's a new technology.
Yes.
How do we design something to fit it? What was the second one you referred to?
The market pull.
The market pool.
Yeah.
I suppose that's understandable. But the design-led pool, I guess, is the one that you're most interested in.
Oh, of course. And in 2015, the World Design Organization, and before the name called EXIT, and we released a new definition of design. And before we talk about design, it's very much professional based. But in 2015, and we made a new definition of design. And in that definition, we highlight importance of design. Design is a kind of a problem solving, a strategic problem solving process that drives innovation, makes business success, and leads to a better quality of life. And we through, innovative product, system, services, and experience. So in this way, and when we talk about the transforming the economy in China, I think that the design is very much based on imagination. So it bridges a gap between what it is and what is possible. So in some way, creativity becomes more and more important for China's economy transformation, but not only for China, but also in a global sense.
And I want to come back to the point about how we bring in the community and how we work with people in design-led innovation, because I know this is a big interest of yours. But first, can we move to that point about mindset? If we're moving to a designed in China era, then surely there's been a large mindset shift amongst designers in China. What's behind that?
I will say that when we talk about the traditional design and now today's design, before design actually is a part of the innovation chain or industry chain. So normally somebody invents something and the engineers make a product, but it's too ugly, and then invite a designer to make it more beautiful and then put it into market. And then we have the users, they have consumers. And then, when the product, it's at the end of its life, and then we face the problem of recycling it. But nowadays, when we talk about design and the whole innovation chain and the whole industry chain, there is design slow. It's very obvious. So, look at my college. And before we only have industrial design, of course, architecture is another story. But now, we not only design the products, but also we design the environments, and design the services, design the interactions, designs the strategies, and designs even, the AI and the data system. So in this way, and design has a much rich application fields. And so in a sense, this is the reason why, when we here talk about the circular economy, so it's not only the product issue, it's about the system issue.
And please tell us about your backstory, because you haven't always worked in design. So how did you get into this place? My background was from architecture. So I was an architect in practice. I was a very productive architect 10 years before, and before 2005, I've been realized 400,000 square meters public buildings. So. But the story of design actually is also very closely related to architecture. This year particularly, we celebrate the 100 years anniversary of a Bauhaus. And the modern design actually has been combined together with architecture, for years. In my university, actually design was part of architecture since 1940s. But in 2009, and we separate the design program from architecture. So there's some link. But why we separate the design from architecture, it also means that the design has a totally new agenda. So it's not only, if you look at the architecture as a product, so we not only focus on, not only, interested in, products, but also, we are more and more pay attention to the system and combining the tangible and the intangible system together. I want to hear a bit about your work in education, because I know you're doing some fascinating things both at Tongji University but also with a high school you work with. Let's start with the university and the work you're doing prototyping in the community. Can you tell us about that?
And one of the reasons why Tongji need to have a separate design school is we really want to extend contribution of design into all disciplines. And one of the approaches, we try to break the wall, not only the wall, between different disciplines, but also, the wall between the university and the city, and especially the neighborhood. So we actually take a brand new approach, which we regard the community as a kind of a living laboratory. So there's all of problems there, and then the researchers, professors, the students, and they face it, they take advantage of the community as a kind of incubator of all kind of a possible solution for the possible futures. And then in this way we have lots of interaction with the community. So community is not only a kind of application field, but community it's also become a source of creativities and innovation. So that's basically that's the idea behind.
So it enriches the designs and it makes them valid, I guess, if you can see them being used within this community. Oh yes,
not only. We also regard the members of the community as a part of the agent of sustainable social change.
Can you give us some examples of what's been happening in this community? So I think you said yesterday 40% of the work you do in the university actually now takes place in the community itself, in the buildings that people live in. Is that right?
Yes, the neighborhood basically is the residential area. Now we move our laboratory into the community. So now, as I mentioned, 40% of the properties of the school actually is located among the communities. So there's a couple of very interesting stories. And for instance, here we are in the UK, the very famous UK brand, Aston Martin, they set up the first creative laboratory outside of UK, together with Tongji in this community. So, our focus is mainly focused on the future ways of living, the future lifestyle.
And Aston Martin, the car brand.
Car brand.
So is it automobiles that they're looking at in this community?
We are not. Actually, our interest is much more than core design, not this stylish stuff. But we like to explore the possible future ways of living. So it's a future lifestyle. It's, for instance, we talk about the sustainability, and we talk about the dignity of human being in the era of artificial intelligence.
One thing you talked about yesterday was shared spaces in this community. That's one future you see. Can you tell us a little bit about a project that's just got off the ground there?
Oh yes, that's a project of a shared kitchen. So we work with a very famous white goods company called Haya, which is actually the #1 white goods manufacturer in the world. So we work together to test a kind of a new business model, a new lifestyle, which is a sharing kitchen. So I mean, you can book the kitchen, the space, I mean, in an app, and you can even book a chef. So in this way, it create lots of new interactions with different people, and also I think that from the resource-wise, it's a save lots of resource.
And I understand this has only been in place for a short period of time, so it's too early to get to see any great results from this. But young people are moving back into this community when the reverse was happening previously.
Oh, exactly, because there's exciting happening there. So people very much like to be a part of it. So I mean, at the end of this laboratory initiatives, actually, that from our point of view, and we really hope that the new startup can be generated. I mean, in this new ecosystem.
Perfect. So some questions are coming in from the online audience. There's one here from Stella that seems appropriate right now. How hungry are young people in China for ideas like the circular economy, like the sharing economy? Are they asking for ways to apply these concepts?
Oh yes, and now I mean sustainability is really become a booming topic among the young generations, and of course I mean circular economy as a part of the sustainable agenda. I think that it also attracts lots of attention. But I think that in some way, sustainability as a terminology, in some way, is also facing some challenges, because I can see a big gap between the sustainability on the system level when we talk about the systemic sustainability, and also the people's daily lives. So there's a big gap. So I mean, from our point of view, from my point of view, I think that design can contribute to fill the gap and to connect this to system, macro system and the micro system.
And what role do you play when you teach young designers? You bring ideas to them about, do you bring ideas to them about the circular economy, about different business models? Are you teaching them about the entire system? Yeah,
and we have a program, now it's 11 years ago. I mean, 12 years ago, we established a program called Product Service System Design. So PSSD. So this program actually is very much related to circular economy. So when we talk about how to make for instance, we talk about the biological, close the biological loop and close the technological loop. And first it's a design, and it's a designing of a new system, and that system combine the products and services together. So in some way, I mean, circular economy is not new, and now only in this PSSD program, we have been educated more than 300 designers. I think most of the designers, they have circular economy in their minds.
Let's move on to talking about the work you're doing in a high school. So am I right in saying you founded a high school in Shanghai?
Yes.
Yes, and something innovative about the curriculum that you put together there. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, that high school actually is a very nice story. So in 2015, I mean, I made a proposal to try to create a new high school, which is a focus on design thinking and creative ways of learning. And the main feature of this high school is 60% of learning is subject-based, and 40% of learning actually is problem-based, project-based, passion-based, et cetera, et cetera. So in this way, we combine these two ways of learning together. So this is the main feature. So in this way, and the students, they can learn in a real context. So luckily that in 2016, and that, Tongji University, we signed the agreement with Huangpu district, which is the central district of Shanghai, and we got a building which was the building of a mother school of our MP, great architect, and lots of famous people, and it was a very good location, and also in a neighborhood. So we kick off the project in 2016, and now next year we expect to have our first group of students who graduate from this high school.
Very exciting. There's one other project I want to talk about before we say goodbye, and that's a project where you're developing a rural town just outside of Shanghai, I believe, and there's some big work going into this project.
Oh yeah, this is another project I've been working on almost for 12 years. The project name called Harvest. It's mainly about to explore a possible future of China's rural development. So nowadays we have these days we have an opportunity to work with the Qingpu district, so to crowdfunding and cross-sourcing a village which based on the principle of a circular economy. So it would be a possible prototype of a future Chinese rural area.
I asked guests earlier of whether or not they were optimistic about the future. Are you optimistic about the idea that a circular economy, a regenerative economy, can be applied in China?
Yes, I mean the good thing is that even in our definition of new design of released about World Design Organization, we say that a design, one of the very important asset of a design and the designers is that we are optimistic about the future. So how to transfer the challenges, transfer the challenges to become opportunities. So this is what we are now, doing and now working. And it's also very important. It's not only we, but not only we designers, but when you say we, it's in a much larger scale. So everybody actually could be designers.
Well, I think on that optimistic note, it's a good point to end. So thank you very much, Professor Yongqi Liu, for joining us in this show. Thank you, everyone, for watching online. Thanks for the thoughts and questions you put in. And keep watching today. There's 4 more shows coming up. There's one coming up soon where we'll be hearing about Biosphere 2, which is a really fascinating project in the Arizona desert. So keep watching. Thanks for now, and goodbye.
Thank you.
We need to start making more conscious material choices.
Set up an initiative called Make Fashion Circular.
It's a tsunami of change.